Welcome to the Helsi Show, where we journey through health, wellness, self-mastery, and entrepreneurship. Discover powerful insights from industry experts as they share their path to success and offer practical tips to elevate your life. Join us for thought-provoking discussions that inspire you to reach new heights. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Helsi Podcast. I'm so excited to have Josh Wood here from Tasmania, Australia, who's a wellness coach, who educates, who gave an amazing TED Talk recently, which I watched and watched actually more than once because I thought there was so much insight in there as well, and an online fitness coach. I'm really excited, especially about this, because Josh doesn't only cover sort of the nutrition side or only the fitness side. He's the whole package, and he's not only talking about adults, but also about kids. And the language that he uses is really applicable for you as well. So you can really take bits away, and I really highly recommend to everyone to watch his TED Talk. It's a really, really good one. You can find that online on strongforlife.online. Welcome to the show, Josh.
Thank you very much for having me.
So awesome. So you're an online fitness coach. That's not the most common thing to do. How did you get into that?
Well, I've been in health and fitness since I was 17. I started doing MMA when I was 17. I went from being a skinny computer nerd to a skinny guy who gets punched in the head for fun. And that kind of just evolved into like an interest in the body. And I did mixed martial arts and a bit of grappling and stuff for a number of years as I traveled around the world. Started in the U.S. You can tell from my accent. I grew up in Minnesota, and did a bit of traveling through the U.K. and trained as I went along, and moved over to Australia. Started training here in a few places, and eventually I was just kind of like, I just want to know more about the body. And I spent probably at this point 5 or so years learning how to break it. And I was like, well, what does it all do? Like, how do we make it better? How do we fix it? And actually, my first career was massage. And I ended up teaching in Melbourne for about 6 years, the massage courses. And that just kind of went from one thing to the next. I started getting into coaching. Like, I started doing my personal training qualifications. I was working at a boxing gym at the time. And I just kept learning, and I went and did my Bachelor of Health Science, and I majored in traditional Chinese medicine. So acupuncture, herbalism, went into strength and conditioning. I've been working in gyms at this point for probably, 8 years or something. And then about a decade in gyms, technology started coming out that allowed for online systems to be way, way more efficient. Because previously, a lot of coaches would do online stuff, and I started doing a little bit with regular clients that would move on or travel and things like that. But it was Word documents, spreadsheets, and email, and it's just clunky, and it was really hard to get like an immersive experience. But then, 5-6 years ago, it became like this. There was this advent of technology, and people started creating coaching apps that allowed you to have this sort of coach in your pocket experience. And I just jumped on that and started using it with in-person clients for programming and creating metrics and showing progress over time. And then just sort of started building out systems to do it remotely, and just shifted into it because it was just like, you can't do anything really with an hour a week. People try to book in for their one PT session, and not to be like knocking on the industry, but we're expensive, because it's a lot of our time and it takes a lot of expertise to get the results. But for an hour, you're not getting anything done. And so I started building out these hybrid systems. It's like, you come train for an hour, I'm going to write up programs for the rest of your week. We're going to start looking at your nutrition, start looking at your sleep and your stress and how you're recovering. And then sort of move that to a fully online system where I can work with people in their living room, be in their pocket 7 days a week. They always know what they need to do. They have a map, they have a program, they have a plan, and they follow it. And it became a sort of immersive way of like having a live-in coach. But it came about through like my interest in more lifestyle, longevity-based health and fitness, but also an advent of technology.
Yeah. When listening to you, I think reflecting on what's out there, it's not the knowledge that is the problem necessarily. Maybe the education on how to use certain ideas and ideologies and systems. But what I hear you saying is that one touch point alone, and otherwise you leave them to their own device, would not work. But what does work is a continuous awareness daily, and also activities and reminders to make sure people actually do the right thing, right?
Yeah, accountability is the biggest part of that. Like we can't keep ourselves accountable indefinitely. We need an external source of accountability. And just the demographic I work with, busy parents, professionals, people who run their own businesses, they need flexibility. They can't be locked into 3 p.m. 3 days a week or whatever. Yeah. They need that flexibility, but they also need to not have to think about all the answers. They just need to be told, follow this map, and I guarantee, and I literally guarantee the results. Like it's I put my money where my mouth is, and it's like, we will get you these results, or I'm going to train you for free until it happens. Yeah. Because if you follow the plan, it works. And the people I work with are so time poor. They're like, I've been putting this off for 20 years. I don't know where to start. I don't know how to keep going. I just did some YouTube video workouts, and it's like, that's fine, but it's not really getting me there. It's like, yeah, okay, I got you. Follow the plan. We'll get there.
Yeah. Wow, that's fascinating. Because I believe there's enough information out there. That's really not the issue. But
exactly.
I guess what I also want to acknowledge, because some people say, "Oh, I'm so busy," and I would say it's the time, it's the age where everyone is busy, because you have access to so much information and entertainment and activities and you name it, and that has a lot to do with the digital age, but also with flexibility of work and so on. And so I can see the downside of, like, there's so much that focusing on your health goals, let's say, is not easy. So I'm definitely in your demographic, because it sounds exactly like that. If you have kids, especially younger kids, sticking to a routine is not always up to you. If they are sick, or if something unusual is sort of like on the schedule, suddenly you can't make it. If you only have one opportunity per week to show up, then it's already a week lost. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And, like you said, there's just so much information, and gosh, probably 80% of the people I speak to, they're overwhelmed. They're running into this paralysis by analysis. There's so much out there, but where do I start? How much do I need to do? And then they think they need to do everything all at once. And it's like, no, man, we just need to start with one step. Master one thing, and then we'll add something to that when you no longer have to think about the first thing.
Could we play this a little bit and go a little bit through that? As I said, sure. I did look at your TED Talk, and I think the overarching theme is like, eat like an adult, but I think that's just the nutrition side. So maybe we take it just a little bit wider. But like, how do you look at a person, and how do you engage with them, and how do you gauge what's required so that you can get them to whatever goal that might be?
Well, there's two parts there. So if we look at the eat like an adult concept, like that's obviously nutrition focused, but it's more so focused on the relationship with food. But the overarching concept is adults understand that their future is created by the decisions they make today. You have to make conscious decisions that lead to where you want to be. So many people just wake up one morning and they're like, oh, I'm fat, I'm sick, my body hurts, and I hate myself. And it's like, well, how'd you get there? Like, what have you been doing for the last 20 years? It's a lack of conscious decision making. And applied to food, that's the eat like an adult concept. But the first thing is taking accountability and being in that position where you're like, I need to make a change. And then the big questions, because I go through this full interview process before I take anyone on, it's like, not everybody's going to do the work, and I don't want to waste my time or their money. I want to make sure that we're going to get you to where you want to be. And the first step is realizing you need to be somewhere you're not, and then figuring out why you want to be in that spot. For some people, it's very, very simple. I'm in a public facing job, and I need to look like a leader. I need to not be out of breath and sweaty by the time I get up on stage. I don't want to be out of breath every time I walk up the stairs into my office. For parents, a lot of times it's like, I just need to keep up with these little things. They never run out of energy, and I just can't keep up, or I can't get on the ground and wrestle around with them, or I can't play at the playground. And so you start digging into like, what is it you're trying to achieve? And then why is it important to you? And a lot of it's tied to feelings of self-worth, but also for parents and business owners, there's something external that we need to rise to the challenge for. We need to lead these people. We need to become successful and profitable. And if I feel like garbage all the time, or can't perform well, or can't represent the ideals that I hold important, it's not going to happen. Or so I need to keep up with my kids. I need to set an example for them. I talked to a lady, I think it was last week. She's like, I need to be accountable to myself so that I can be an example for my son. And I was like, beautiful. Like that's the why. That's the important part. You know, weight loss, getting stronger, looking good, all that's secondary to like what really is driving. And that's either something very powerful externally, like family, or it's something very powerful internal, like feelings of self-worth and worthiness. But you have to kind of figure out what it is for the individual and really dig into what's going to drive them. Because if that why isn't strong enough, if that why isn't nearly life or death, people don't do the work.
Yeah. Really extreme example is this whole concept of when you're young and healthy, you have many dreams, but when you're sick and old, you only have one, and that's getting healthy again, right? You know, but that's
right.
Normally too late or much harder to do.
Yeah, I hate to say it's too late. Like I've worked with guys in their 60s and they still kick ass and really get things done. And you can do something, but man, it's hard. And every single one of them is like, I wish I did this 40 years ago. Right now is 40 years ago. It's 40 years ago. Right now is that time. And so if you're listening to this and you're like, I don't want to, or everything's too hard, it's like, you will regret it at some point in your life and wish you did it 40 years ago. So just do it.
Yeah. So if we take an example, let's say I live in Sydney, I'm having an office job, got my first couple of kids and still work. And I realize, actually, this is quite true for me, not that I lived in Sydney, but first child. So if I could see on my sleep score, you know, I'm dropping by 90 minutes on average going forward. And the scale goes up by 20 kg over the next 1.5 years. I think it's quite common. I used to be the one I used to live in quite a wealthy suburb, and I could see sort of, I was before that point where I gained weight. So there was a lot at secondhand, sort of like school fairs of my size. And I could see then, I hope it doesn't hype into me that suddenly, you know, you go from a 36, whatever it might be, to a 40 in jeans and so on. It was always good bargains, but, you know, now I'm on the other side. And I see exactly how hard it is actually to go back to your, you know, fit you before kids. And so if you think about the cornerstones of that, I get it. There's a why there. But then if you have a strong why, how would you tackle it in a busy world while you still pursue your personal goals as well as running a family and all of that? Like how would you instill that and what would that look like?
So I like to simplify things. Like that's my whole thing, is trying to take like complex topics and make them simple and achievable. The very, very first thing that we work on is the smallest thing. So I do a sort of a lifestyle assessment, food journal, see where you're at, what you're doing every day, that kind of thing, figure out what's important to you. And it's like, okay, well, what is the smallest thing we need to implement that's going to have the biggest change? Like, I'm not going to give you a meal plan and a 7-day-a-week workout program, you know, bedtime, wake up time, meditation time, all that jazz. It's going to be like, okay, well, what's the thing that you need the most right now? Is it going to be nutrition? Is it going to be exercise? Is it going to be just walking? You know, for a lot of people, just getting them moving, you need to take baby steps. And I think of this like, if someone's got a big challenge in their life, whether it's just getting more active or dealing with their food or whatever, you know, you think of that like a mountain. You have this mountain that you have to climb over. Well, if you need to move a mountain, what do you use? TNT, dynamite. So you start with tiny, noticeable things, TNT, each day. And for a lot of people, it's literally getting off the couch and going for a 10-minute walk. And then we do 10 minutes 3 times a day. Every time you eat a meal, you're going for a 10-minute walk. Before, after, you can walk and eat if you want to. I don't care, but you're walking for 10 minutes 3 times a day. And this is where we start putting that thin edge of the wedge in there. and start creating more time because you start feeling better, having more energy, and then you're getting the results. So you're like, oh, I feel good. This is fine. This is easy. I can do more. But people, again, get stuck in this idea that they have to do all these things. I have to join CrossFit. I have to start running for a marathon. It's like, just walk for, you haven't been off the couch in 20 years. Just walk for 10 minutes. Let's do that 3 times a day. It's 3.5 hours of activity that you wouldn't get normally. And you've been telling yourself for years you don't have time or energy. So we start small. Or maybe it's, focusing on getting enough protein. I've not met a person who isn't steeped in health and fitness who is getting enough protein. So we start there. Because immediately, I like an additive approach. So especially with nutrition, we add these things in. We start off with more nutrient-dense foods, more protein-dense foods, which pushes out other things. And you start realizing you're not actually hungry all the time. You start feeling and actually being nourished. You start recovering better. Your energy levels improve by adding instead of, saying you can't do this and you need to take this out. So a lot of times it's just movement. Sometimes it's just basic low intensity workouts once or twice a week, 20 to 45 minutes, whatever you can fit in. Sometimes it's just focusing on, let's just work on food and just focusing on getting enough protein across the day. It just depends where people are at and like where that most important first step is. And if they have a little bit more time and capacity, we'll do a couple things, but never more than a couple things.
Why is protein so important, Josh?
Well, I mean, the obvious answer is because your entire body is made out of protein. Hair, skin, nails. What makes your bones rigid is collagen, which is a protein. And then, obviously there's your musculoskeletal system. And, people sometimes take it for granted, but if we removed your skeletal muscle, you'd weigh about 10% of what you weigh now. You are mostly muscle. And your ability to speak, to look, to interact with the world is dependent on the quality and health of your muscular system. So protein is what builds that. We got to focus on recovery first.
Gotcha. So on this protein thing, I'm sure this topic is as old as nutritional sort of science and all the rest of it. But when looking into it, of how to actually get the amount of protein that some schools would prescribe to, that's a lot of protein. Or do I get it wrong? And that's just an extreme view. Is it actually fairly easy to get enough protein?
It depends.
In your diet?
Depends where you're at. It depends what food you like, what you tend to eat more of. I think a lot of people overshoot in the beginning. Again, I like to start small. If we're working on numbers, for whatever reason, I've got a lot of accountants that I work with, so they love numbers. Not even joking. And numbers are good for them. They're like, I want to know exactly how much. And we're like, okay. So we start at the low end. I want you to get 1.2 grams of protein per kilo of body weight. And if that's easy, we go to 1.6. If it's someone who's more visual or like some more intuitive approach, we look at the size of your palm, thick, height, width, all that jazz. And you say, okay, well, these are a list of high protein density foods. You need to have at least 3 palm-sized servings a day from whatever category, whether you're, omnivorous or you're more vegetarian, doesn't matter. But here are, a list of foods going from greater protein density to less protein density. Try and find something at least 3 times a day. Eat a serve of this. That's about the size of your palm. And we start there. We start off with 2 to 3 serves and then move 3 to 4. And then we start adding other food groups. But again, this additive approach pushes out a lot of the less optimal food choices. And as soon as you start realizing that a lot of times you're eating because you're bored or undernourished, getting that protein up starts to make you feel better, be more nourished, regulate blood sugar, help you feel fuller. You just end up not having these junk food cravings as we get that higher and higher. And it pushes other things out because you're like, oh, I'm actually not hungry. I don't need to eat that Snickers bar.
That reminds me on someone. Hey, how there's this conversation of like, well, that actually is I don't want to go too deep in this protein thing, but I just want to clear one thing up because you seem to know quite a bit about this. So there's meat, and that has a certain density of protein, and then there is broccoli, which also has a certain density of protein, and then there's whey and hemp and other like pea protein and so on. But are these all equivalently available? How much do we really need of these different sources? Like, I've never been able to really gain an understanding that gives me confidence that I actually know what I'm doing when I'm looking for protein in my diet.
Well, there's a few aspects to that. So there is the protein density. So how much protein per certain amount of calories or certain weight. Something that's more protein dense, 100, you might get 100 calories and you might get 30 grams of protein. Or to get 30 grams of protein, you might need 1,000 calories. So density of protein per serve is important in terms of making sure you're eating enough, but not too much or too little. There's also the bioavailability. So there's the ability for our body to break down and utilize the amino acids that make up the proteins. And there's the completeness of the protein. Some foods are complete proteins, meaning they have all essential amino acids, and some do not. So if we look at, animal versus plant sources, your animal sources are going to be the densest, so giving you the most protein per serve, and they are the most bioavailable, and they are complete proteins. Plant sources, depending on where you're at on the scale, will be more or less, but almost always less bioavailable and less complete. So you have to eat more of them to get the same amount. So if we look, for example, a lot of people will be like, oh, I get my protein from nuts. We'll talk about broccoli in a second. And this is something, because I teach the personal training courses as well. And so we've literally just gone over the nutrition unit last week. And I always get in this conversation, and it's like, okay, so you can have about a palm and a half of, say, chicken breast, bodybuilder's favorite. Why is it? Because it's really dense protein source, low fat, mostly just protein. So you don't have to eat a lot. So you get 150 grams, 200 grams of chicken breast, and you're getting 30 or 40 grams of protein. I'm a 75 kilo guy. I aim for about 150 grams of protein a day. I can basically have 3 serves of chicken and knock that out. Pretty close anyway, especially with a mixed meal with some other things in there. Cool. And that's going to be somewhere around, 300, 400 calories per serve.
Wow.
So I can hit my protein pretty easily at about 12 to 1,300 calories. Whereas almonds, everyone loves almonds. Almonds are great snack. You can get 30 grams of protein. It'll be not a complete protein. You won't get all your amino acids. You'll have to get the rest from somewhere. It'll be very poorly digested. Nuts are hard to digest. And you'll need to eat about a cup of almonds to get around 30 grams of subpar protein. Well, a cup of almonds is about 850 calories. So if I want to get 150 grams of protein from almonds, I'm going to need about, 5 cups? It's like 4,000 plus calories of pure fat just to get subpar protein intake. And you know what? I'm probably going to shit myself before I can even eat all that. It is very hard on the guts. So it's, it's like, you can do it, but it's going to make your life hard. Yeah. And you mentioned broccoli. I see this meme going around for the last 15 years, and it's like, you can get your protein from broccoli. And it's like, you will literally need a wheelbarrow full of broccoli to get your 150 grams for a mid-sized adult male. And it's not going to be complete. And man, the amount of fiber, you are going to bloat so hard. And that's assuming like you're actually cooking it well, because cooking makes food more digestible. And, it's like, yeah, you can, but how much do you hate your guts? Like you're gonna fart hard. Like it's going to be brutal. So it's like, there's things you can do, and there's things that you probably shouldn't do. And there's things that make your life easier. And so if we focus on denser sources, if you don't do meat, things like Greek yogurt, man. I honestly, that is my number one source of protein is yogurt. I actually buy 2 kilo tubs of Indian yogurt now because they're $9.90 for 2 kilos. And nice. I'm probably so good. I'm probably 50% yogurt. Like my body is mostly yogurt, just because I love it. And it's easy to eat, and I can mix all sorts of stuff with it. That's fine. Cheeses, dairy is great. Eggs. You get lower on the scale with things like tofu and beans and pulses, because you get higher in carbohydrates. So it's like, I can get my protein. Again, you're going to deal with the digestive load of having to eat a lot of it. Yeah. So it can all be done, but it's just like, the better you understand your protein sources and how they're digested and broken down, the easier you can make your life. When it comes to, you mentioned like pea protein and hemp and things. When we look at studies comparing protein supplements, so whey is a byproduct of cheese making. it's the leftover liquid that's dehydrated. It kind of helps utilize what would otherwise be a wasted product. Very bioavailable. Whey protein is excellent, easily digested source as long as you don't have lactose problems, because there's usually residual lactose in the whey. But like pea protein, hemp, soy isolates, like protein supplements, are fine. They're fine. They're going to be a little bit lower in leucine. Is it leucine? I think it's leucine. But like when you have comparative studies looking at whey protein versus like soy isolate versus pea protein, they're pretty much the same. It's like when we're talking about supplements, you're extracting the raw protein from the food source. That's very different from trying to get your protein from peas and broccoli.
Okay. That's great, and that clarifies definitely where the source comes from. Just going now back to why we actually eat that amount of protein. If you know how there are food pyramids, I don't know, some of them are terrible, some but if you think about sort of the different types of foods, there's fat, there's carbohydrate, there's protein, maybe fiber. I don't know what the other categories are, to be honest. But if we put them in relationship to each other, like is there a ratio that you like overall? Of course, everyone is different, everyone has a different metabolism, body and size, whatever. Is there sort of a bit of a ratio to go by?
Yeah, so there's two things that you mentioned there. You mentioned food groups, and then you mentioned macronutrients. So every food is going to have a range of macronutrients. And macronutrients are the nutritive components of food. So they're the things that give us energy. They're the basic compounds that we will break down and use as energy. So you have fats, carbohydrates, and protein. Different food groups have higher proportions of each. So a food will have a range of all three of those in some proportion, and the macronutrients themselves are those components. So in general, like for average, like just trying to be healthy and eating a well-rounded diet, eat a good mix of everything. I would say if we're looking at macronutrient breakdown for just general health, kind of like 30-30-30. 30% protein, 30% fats, 30% carbs, and then tinker with that. Keep the protein around 30 or so percent, and you're going to do just fine. Like you're going to have a really hard time over consuming. Some people drop that 20-25% and do just fine. But then the carbs and fats, like they're primarily energy sources. Like we do need fats to live, like they are an essential nutrient. Carbohydrates are not an essential nutrient, meaning if you take them out of your diet, you won't die. But for a performance standpoint, you definitely want to have a good mix of carbs. Okay. But generally, if you just have a good mix, split that up, 30-30-30, or, you get your protein a little higher or lower, and you swap around your carbs and your protein to what feels good for you, you're going to be fine. Like that's just general health. And it's a lot harder to overconsume if you have a good mix with a good amount of protein in there.
Gotcha. So if we look at imbalance or people that are not particularly healthy, I assume it's less too much protein, but more too much fat or too much carbohydrates, right?
Yeah, like you can't, it gets tricky. There's no, the macronutrients are not good or bad. There are things that provide energy and building blocks for a body. You need all of them more or less. Like I said, you don't really need carbs, but they do make your life better. And especially because a lot of things that contain carbs are your plant sources, which are objectively healthy for you. Like you get more fruits and vegetables, some whole grains, you're going to be pretty good. There's good nutrients in there that we need. Although the macronutrient carbohydrate isn't technically essential. Most people over consume. So it's not that they're taking too much of a individual macronutrient or set of macronutrients, it's the total caloric load. We are taking in too much energy, and our body has to do something with that. And it mostly just stores excess. And the big problem is, we are basically still cavemen, Stone Age humans. That's how our brain works. And we're used to this idea of if there is a mammoth that we kill, we have to eat it before it goes bad because we don't know when the next one's coming around. And so our bodies still kind of work off that system. But instead of mammoths, we have potato chips and ice cream and fried food and things that are what we call hyper palatable, meaning they're so delicious that we don't have an innate trigger that says stop eating. And so we overconsume energy and underconsume nutrients. So very nutrient poor foods, very energy dense. And so we have this excess of energy, which gets stored as body fat, which then leads to a host of health issues, not just the physical weight that wears on the joints, but the cardiovascular ill health and cardiovascular disease, kidney disease, high blood pressure, even cancers. Like there's cancers that are basically 100% correlated with obesity that you just don't see in non-obese populations. And it's just from over consuming energy.
Wow. Does that feed in one of those pillars that I've heard you talking about, which is like, it's good enough? Like not looking for the best treat and not looking for the, most amazing meal, but actually, can you talk a little bit about that? Like that rings truth in me for sure.
Yeah. I mean, it's this mindset that we tend to find ourselves in, especially if you just don't have a lot of free time or brain space and you've used up all your willpower trying to get your kids into bed. We kind of get in this mental trap where it's like, if I can't do something that's perfect, I'm just going to do something that's detrimental. If I can't, have this pretty okay granola bar, I'm just going to eat a block of chocolate. It's like, just throw it all out the window. And it's like, what? No, just do good enough. The example I use a lot is, you go out to eat with your friends, you go out for a pub meal, and it's like, I'm trying to look after my health and I'm trying to get in shape, but I'm at the pub and I'm with friends. So instead of getting something that's good enough, I'm just going to get the, cream sauce fettuccine with a couple pints of beer and dessert. And it's like, well, none of that's good for you. You could have just got a burger. Like people have this idea that burgers are so terrible, but it's a piece of protein, a salad, and a dinner roll. And it's like, that's not bad. It's good enough. That's fine. Like you're at least going to be hitting your minimum nutrient needs instead of throwing it all out the window and being like, I'm just going to eat garbage because it's fun. But nobody does that and then goes, I feel great.
Yeah, so true. I recently started again to count my calories, and nowadays these apps are fairly sophisticated, so you get all sorts of insights anyway. But just from a calorie point of view, it's just the education as well, I believe. Like exactly that what you're saying there. We sometimes have team lunches, or I have business meetings or anything like that, and so there's a limited choice because you're at a particular place and you got to eat what there is, but there's still the healthy choice and not. And I think that for me that comes sort of education and reminder of like, hey, just so that as you said earlier, like don't eat the fries, or maybe you said that in your TED talk actually, don't eat the fries but only the burger and you will be fine. Because once you use these apps and you actually see like, oh, okay, the fries are like just off the Richter. Like
it's more than the meal.
Yeah. Which is, I guess it's counterintuitive too, because you look at the volume, it's like, surely that like those few fries, they can't be that bad. But
they're disproportionately right? calorie dense because they're soaked in oil. And just for some context, like 1 gram of protein and 1 gram of carbohydrate are only about 4 calories, but 1 gram of fat is 9 calories approximately. For the same volume, it's over twice as much energy. This is where we get into that problem where if you mix carbohydrates, fats, and salt, things are too delicious and we can't stop eating. And then secretly, they're also incredibly calorie dense.
Yeah. So just to wrap up that good enough point, you're basically saying, let yourself a little bit off the hook when you have, when you travel, when you have social engagements, but still don't take the eyes off the ball that actually there are still options that are better for you and some that are worse, right?
That's right. Just do good enough. I've got a lot of clients who travel. Few clients that work for the local university here, and they're in sort of like enrollments, and they're over in India and Europe and the Middle East and Southeast Asia all the time for work. And they're a couple of them are really, really on the ball with their food and their training. And it's at that time I'm just like, don't even bother tracking, man. Just like hit your protein goals, enjoy yourself, stop eating when you're full. Just do good enough, and then we can pick up the slack when you get back. Like it's too hard basket to try and do all of that when you're on the road working and you have no idea what you're being fed.
Yeah. I don't drink alcohol, but just out of interest, are there good and bad choices when it comes to, I don't know, beer, wine, red versus white?
They are all what we call discretionary choices. There is no real health benefit It is just a purely enjoyable thing. Like, you talk about red wine and the antioxidants, like, yeah, but you get just as many from a cup of coffee or tea. Like, you're not getting a real benefit
Yeah.
there. The benefit is this social. The benefit is in its relaxative effects and in the enjoyment of the situation.
Mm.
Um, I had a client a few years back. We still train together. Like, he's one of my in-person clients, but his thing, he's an accountant. He's a young guy. And he drank too much beer, man. Like, he just always drinking with his friends. And he was 116 kilos at the time. And I was like, no, this is gotta stop. Like, you don't have to stop drinking. That's fine. But we're putting you on the cowboy diet. Your meals are steak or chicken. And if you drink whiskey. You drink a man's spirit, and you drink it neat or with a little water, and that's it. And he really like got on that. He was like, okay, all right, I can do that. He lost 20 kilos in a year. And it's just like, the beer, again, it's the calories. Wine too. Wine is usually more of an issue for some of the women I work with. A lot of the men, it's beer because it's a cultural thing. That's what the boys drink. They go out and they get on the beers. It's like, but as soon as you swap that out for clear spirits or spirits with non-caloric mixers, you cut the calories by like 2/3. And all of a sudden you're not consuming an extra 1,500 calories a night. You're consuming 300 or 400. And it just makes a huge difference to swap that out from a caloric perspective. Ideally, you just wouldn't drink that much. But if we can't change that, we'll change how much useless energy you're getting from it.
Gotcha. Which leads me to another pillar that you're talking about, or habit, which is treat your treats as treats.
Mm.
I love that too, and I'm really guilty of. I have great justifications of why I should have that brownie. I'm not really a cake person, but you know what? Yeah, right. You're talking about a Snickers bar. It's rare, but at the same time, if the day was hard and I don't have the energy to go through the end of the day, well, at least that's what I tell myself, then that really works well. Or if a meeting is coming up and it's like, I have to lead this meeting and I have to be really on what do I have as choices to get on that.
That's a little bit different than treats too.
Okay.
That's fueling, so like, a lot of public speakers, a lot of people who are performing, even in sports and stuff like that, they'll do something like that. You'll get that little sugar boost because your brain uses a large amount of glucose, and during the day, up to 20% of your calories can be burnt up by your brain. And so if you're really on the ball for something, whether it's performance in athletics or speaking or teaching, things like that, having that little boost right before you go out there can actually be really beneficial for performance. Now, if it's after the fact and you've just had your normal 9 to 5 and you're eating the same treat every night, I gotta have my 2 glasses of wine or my block of chocolate, like that's a pattern, that's a habit, and that's not a treat, because treats are earned. They are something that you've done something special. There's an unusual but positive thing that you're engaging in. But if you're doing it all the time, same time each day, same time on the weekend, it's not a treat, it's just your diet. And as soon as you realize that, you can start working with it. And that's fine too. Like, we have takeaway food once a week. There's a food van around the corner from us. It serves my absolute favorite soul food, the one food I would never give up, which is poutine, which is a French Canadian dish, which is essentially like chips, like French fries, with dark gravy and fresh cheese curds. And it is just hitting every part of my soul. It is my favorite food in the world, and I have that once a week. And you know what? Yeah, that's an 800 calorie meal, and that's fine. I'm not saying it's a treat. It's an absolute purely enjoyable experience for me. And that doesn't mean I don't have a six pack. It's like, it's balance. I'm allowing myself this incredibly enjoyable thing that I love purely for the enjoyment of it, knowing it's not helping me, but it's not hindering me either, because it's balanced across the week. So once you see these habits, you can work with them. But don't call it a treat unless you did something special. You don't get a treat because you went to your 9 to 5. I'm not going to give you a gold star for existing. Like, you got to do something special.
That's really insightful. Thank you. I have a mentor, and he often says 10% naughty is, let yourself off the hook, because if you're too rich, it's just not sustainable, I guess, because, no one is perfect. And
we have to have some fun in life. We have to do enjoyable things.
Yeah. Because I'm sure you have seen the opposite as well. I certainly have, where people are so amazing with their rigid regime, but you can also see that that's not healthy either. Maybe the body is amazing, but the mind might feel really restricted, or there are other things that come into place, and then that makes sense, I guess. Like we're not machines either, right?
Yeah, that's right. And the thing is, food is such a big part of our enjoyment in life. Like when you talk to people who travel a lot, like when I talk about travel and like the places I've been and the places I want to go, it's because I want to eat the food. I love going to Southeast Asia for the food. I hate the heat. I don't like the jungle. It's sweaty and gross. But damn, the food's good. Like, and so that's a huge part of like travel and human experience and culture and socialization. Like, we don't want to take the joy out of food on occasion or in moderation. But the problem is, enjoyable things a lot of people can't just do in moderation. They have to do it until they make themselves sick.
That's an awesome insight. Yeah, there's a lot of truth in that. Okay, so a treat is a treat, which means really it's a reward in a sense, isn't it?
It is 100%.
Yeah, okay. And sort of more than once a week is already borderline, would you say? Or it really depends on what's happening in your life?
Depends on your balance. You can definitely, like, if you're going through a real tough week and you've got like presentations and things you have to do all week, you know what? You might treat yourself because you've worked your ass off and you've done a good effort and it's for this week. You might be traveling and you might be just trying to enjoy as much as possible. That's fine. But once it becomes an everyday, forever thing, it's not a treat. It's just your diet.
You have a couple of other habits that are good to instill. The first one you mentioned in your TED Talk is the apple test. That sounds like a really, really clever one. We have a lot of fruit around the office, and they've been there for years. And I recently sort of got into that habit of like, well, let's see how hungry I really am, and grab some of the fruit that is around there. And that's a feedback I've gotten over the years again and again as well. It's like, you're actually not eating enough fruit. I always thought like, oh yeah, it's sugary, it's not so good. But on the other hand, it's very different what it does to our body compared to a Mars bar.
Yeah, but it also just makes you feel fuller. You're getting more water, you're getting more fiber, apples in particular. So I love apples. They're one of my favorite fruits next to blueberries. But
nice apples in Tasmania?
Oh, up until 1950, we were the top apple exporter in the world.
Whoa.
Tasmania's,
okay, here we go.
Tasmania's nickname is the Apple Isle. Like, we've got a great history of apple cultivation and a lot of apple strains that are world renowned. A lot of people don't realize, like, even Australia across the board, we have so many apples that people don't realize originated here, like the Granny Smith. Anyway, that's getting into my apple love there.
Well, here's just something cultural from Germany for you. So I remember, I grew up with a lot of apples around, and it's amazing what you can still hear me, right?
Yep.
Yeah, good. It's amazing how many varieties there are also in Germany for sure, and in Europe. And I remember as a child going through orchards that had a lot of variety and feeling just that abundance of like trying that one. No, that's not quite right. And you throw it away just after one bite and you take another one. And that's certainly like my first experience of real abundance. And I still love that thought. The other one I wanted to share with you is it's not uncommon to store them really well, for over the winter. So you would actually wrap each an individual apple in a newspaper and have them stored really well so that they don't rot. And there's a particular way of doing that. And I remember to this day, as a teenager, and I visited a friend, and the father after dinner was saying like, all right, what are we feeling? A little bit more like on the sour side, on the sweet side. And he would go into his storage and pick the ones, not literally pick, but take the ones out of storage that he thought was right. And I was amazed how flavor can be conserved. When you talk about fruit, you normally talk about a shelf life of 1 or 2 weeks, whereas like if you actually treat it well, you can have it well into the winter. And it was one of those things in the subtropics where I live now. There's no chance to easily do that, but it certainly, it stayed with me because I thought like this is an old skill as well, probably, of knowing all of that. But and then also you have sort of that connection to this has been a really nice experience for generations, for many, many
Yeah.
generations. And so I relate to you. I love apples, but sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you at the same time.
No, it is interesting, and it's very cool because they do store great. This is getting into horticulture stuff, but like, most of the apples you're eating in the summer have been stored in cold storage because apples are ripe through the autumn and winter. Certain ones come a little bit earlier, but generally autumn and winter is apple season. And then if you're eating apples in the summer, they've been in cold storage. They store very, very well. But from a satiety standpoint, making you feel full, they're particularly good because they are fibrous, they're full of water, and they have a compound in them called pectin, which if you've ever made any homemade preserves, a lot of times traditionally you'd add in some apple peels or add in just pectin in powdered form, and it gels. It absorbs water and turns into a gel. And that can actually make you feel fuller because it holds water in your stomach and digestive tract, thus taking up more space. So they're sweet, they're texturally great, they're crunchy. There's a lot of health benefits. They're very high in antioxidants. So that's one of the reasons I think the apple works very well, and they're ubiquitous. Everyone can find an apple in the Western world, basically. But going back to the habit, the idea is like if you're digging in your pantry for a sweet treat, you got to ask yourself, are you even hungry? Like, are you just looking for something sweet because you're managing a craving or high stress levels, or you're not sleeping enough, or you're not eating well in the first place? If you're hungry, you'd eat an apple if it was offered to you. If I came up behind you real sneakily in your house and handed this apple to you, aside from how creepy that would be, if you were hungry, you'd eat the apple. If you're not hungry and you're like, no, I just want the Snickers bar, you're not hungry. And as soon as you start realizing that, you can actually start managing those behaviors. But you have to have that moment of, oh, I'm just doing this habitually, or I'm trying to self-medicate with food. An apple, you use a banana, it could be a pear, a persimmon, whatever. Handful of berries. Berries are great. I like to go seasonal. So it's berries. Actually, we got a bunch of figs right now from one of my clients. The kids never had them before until last night, and they were just in awe. They're like, these are amazing. So it's figs right now, and then apples are coming in soon. It doesn't matter. Some sort of fruit works great.
Yeah. How old are your kids?
My oldest boy is 5 in July, and my youngest is about 1.5 years now.
Very good. That's a great age.
They're young.
I really enjoy that. Yeah.
They're good fun. They're a handful.
Look, it's a great way to participate in life. That's what I came to appreciate, and I always remind myself when it's like I had quite a disrupted night, but at the same time, it's also really special to be there for someone who has a fever and can't sleep and wrestles with like, how do I settle myself? That's at least what I pick up from our 1-year-old. It's like, I'm here for you, and I try to teach you also to try to settle yourself, but it is what it is. It certainly feels real because you can't predict what's happening, and you can't put that in a schedule. That they do behave like nature.
No. Yep. Exactly. It's a very human experience.
That's it. Related to the apple test in a sense, where you said like, well, you're actually not hungry, but you still want to eat, is something else that you say, which is don't eat your emotions, right?
Yes. It's sort of the other side of that. Yeah. It's. A lot of times we use food to regulate our emotions. And obviously it's easier said than done. It's easy for me to say, just don't eat your emotions. But you first have to probably run the apple test and start recognizing when you are emotional or boredom eating. And what you're doing is basically teaching yourself how not to regulate your emotions. You are self-medicating with food, and we think food's fine and everything, but it does have a chemical response in the body. We do get, some dopamine, and we feel good after we eat some sugar for a little bit. And we're self-medicating when we do that. And there's a time and a place. That's fine and dandy if it's a rarity. But if you're doing it every day, you're just making yourself sick, and you're learning how not to regulate your emotions.
Listening to you, it seems like there might be an insight that makes this really, really simple to identify, and also maybe to start working on that. To me, if I just think about the reasons why people, including myself, but also others, might eat, could be things that to me sound super complex, like self-worth and overwhelm and whatever that might be. They're really intangible, sort of. It's not pinpoint of like someone, I don't know, shouted to me at the green light because I overlooked it, and I feel so reveled about it that I need to eat not an apple but a Mars bar. That would be, to me, that would be simple, and I get it. Oh yeah, that's the one off, and I understand it. But these other topics that I've heard before are reasons for emotional eating. They seem really deep and really complex. Like, would you agree, or is there still a way to actually handle that, unpick it, and actually get on top of that?
The first step is recognizing that you're doing it. It's kind of like alcoholism. Say that the first step is recognizing you have a problem. They're on different scales. One is much more detrimental than another, but one is much more easier to normalize. We are all in a society where it's very normal to, just have a little treat. Oh, don't be so strict. Here, have some Easter eggs. Everyone's on it. Everyone sees it, and everyone's always trying to push it on you. Like, I don't. You just have some fun. Just enjoy yourself. And it's like you could, but you're doing that all the time. But as soon as we start recognizing the habit, which is where I think the Apple test really comes in, it's like, oh, I'm just doing this every day at 3:00 and digging for that Mars bar in my drawer. Maybe I'm not hungry. Maybe something else is going on. And you need this kind of stopgap. You need this thing that says, wait, why am I doing that? Creating this introspection. And so you have to have something that creates that so you can dig into it, because you'll probably find there's an emotional or a boredom or a stress component, or your diet's just not very good and you're not nourished and you're always hungry because you're never actually getting the nutrients you need. Like, all these come into the picture. But until you have something that stops that pattern and makes you think about it, you can't ever recognize it until you hit rock bottom. Like, that's always the alternative. The alternative is you get into such a bad position in life that you've hit absolute rock bottom and you have to reassess everything. And a lot of times that's where I find people. That's where I'm trying to help build them back up. But I try to put this information out there so that I don't have to do that. So that people don't have to hit rock bottom before they realize they're creating a pattern that is literally going to kill them.
Yeah, literally, right?
Literally. Well, 60% of all Western society is overweight or obese, and everybody has 2 or 3 chronic morbidities by age 40 or something. Like, everybody is chronically ill, and 90% of that comes from how we eat.
Wow. Sounds so simple to fix.
It's not. It's not simple to fix. It's really complicated because people are really complicated. But this is where, like, the habits come into play, because the idea is not so much, we don't have to have a solution to the underlying problem, but we have to have a solution to the behaviors that triggers. It doesn't matter, and I'm going to probably make some people mad, but it doesn't matter what your deep emotional state is or what kind of trauma or whatever happened in your past. What matters is how you're behaving now. And so you can use whatever it is that's deep inside you as an excuse to punish yourself more, or you could recognize that trigger and go, I'm going to move beyond that. I'm going to change my behaviors. I can't change what's happened. I can't change necessarily how I feel now, but I can choose how I act and what I put in my body.
Yeah. And I do feel there's a flow on, flow back effect when you recognize that, and if you stop a certain coping mechanisms, also that it does something to that driver, the trauma that there might be. And let's say you regulate your anger by just eating that treat, and so the anger goes down. And my theory is that, and correct me if I'm completely off there, but like, if you would say, okay, I know that I do this, but instead I actually now deal with the anger in the moment, so I can see the heat comes up, I don't have a treat, or I don't want to eat the treat anymore, so let me actually look at what is happening when I don't regulate it and work on that. And I believe that's then going the other way, basically, and reducing sort of the driver more and more, right?
And it's a two-way street. Like, you can work on the flow on effects, but by doing that, you're recognizing there is something that is a trigger.
Yeah.
And then you have to choose whether or not I address that or just the flow on effects. But until you can see that, until you start recognizing what behaviors are coming out of that trigger or out of whatever that issue is that then causes the trigger, until you see that, you can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
But it is a two-way street.
Talking to you about all these different topics, it seems to me that by slowly wedging in a new habit, it creates a new balance. I do believe there's always a balance. So if you have a really big trauma, you have a really big coping mechanism, and if you have a lot of stress, same thing, sort of. But as you take one back, the body will look for a new balance in one way or another. And if you do it slowly enough, I think it's actually possible to really get to a much healthier place. To me, it's at least my observation is
Absolutely.
Going slow is actually often much more helpful than giving it a big push and then going all the way back to square one.
And it's more sustainable. It's just like yo-yo dieting. Every time someone does a crash diet or a crash lifestyle change, like these, what do they call it, 75 hard, or like your 90-day transformation, or your 30-day or 28, whatever it is, those don't stick. You can't do everything all at once for a short period of time and have long-term changes in 99% of cases. You need to start small, and you stair step, and you build until all these habits are just as second nature as brushing your teeth. Most people don't have to set a schedule, and they don't have to check in, and they don't have to be reminded and have accountability to brush their teeth, because it's their lifestyle. And that only happens with small incremental changes over an extended period of time. Any of the crash course stuff just doesn't stick.
Yeah, makes sense. Another habit you're talking about is, or another observation maybe, is that mistakes happen, right? So, can you talk a little bit more of what that insight is that you gained?
Yeah, I had a really good conversation around this point. Must have been in January. I was on this other podcast for a lady out of the UK who is a alcoholics coach. So she works with people with alcoholism and helping them sort of move past that, as a former alcoholic herself. And we had a really great conversation around this, because we kind of basically were drawing parallels between my 6 habits to eat like an adult and the way that she works with people with alcoholism. And this was such an interesting one for both of us to talk about, because it's like, in any life-changing journey, you are going to have setbacks. And the worst thing that people do is take that setback and run with it. For alcoholics, it's like, oh, I've had a drink, or I accidentally had a drink, or I wasn't thinking, or I chose to have a drink, and then I'm back on it. I'm just drinking now. And I was like, no, you could literally just stop. And you could see that and recognize it as a speed bump. Wake up tomorrow and just continue on the path. Like, you don't need to. The sooner you recognize you will make mistakes, and to define this, mistakes are, anything that you do that is actively against what you want to achieve. If I want to lose weight and I go out and binge eat and drink for a night, that's a mistake. But you can just go, well, that was one and done. Today I'm back on what I need to be doing, and I'm focusing on my food. I'm going to go to the gym, and I'm going to go for a walk, and it's fine. I'm just not going to try and do that again. And if you can recognize that you will make mistakes on any journey, you will have step backs, you will have stumbles, you will have speed bumps. As soon as you kind of come to terms with that, you go, okay, I can recognize it. And again, it comes back to this sort of conscious decision making, recognizing that something is not helping you, and then going, okay, well, tomorrow I'll just, get back to what I need to be doing. It happened.
Yeah.
It's, I don't like it. Doesn't make me feel good. But instead of wallowing in my misery and just making life worse for myself, I'm just going to move past it. And that's really where it is. Like, that's why it's one of the fundamental 6 habits is it will happen. If you're trying to make a lifestyle change, if you're trying to better yourself, if you're trying to, if we put it in the business world, if you're starting up a business and you're trying to run a startup or do something new, you're gonna make mistakes. You're gonna mess stuff up, and things aren't always gonna work. And you can either just give up, or just get up the next day and be like, all right, have my cup of coffee and get to work.
Yeah. The champions in tennis, they don't win every point. They just win like 53% of the points, and it's a bit, this comes more from my business thinking and making mistakes, because I do see young entrepreneurs sort of almost folding because something goes wrong. It's like, no, you just want to get more things right than not. Eventually, hopefully, mistakes become less and less, but it's actually part of life in quite a way. And there can be insights too, and adjustments that get triggered by making a mistake and say, okay, I wasn't rigid enough, or I shouldn't go to the pub for every meeting that I have, or for every social engagement. Maybe it's sometimes quite good to go for a walk. And that adjustment, I think, happens when you realize like, oh, this is not good enough. So mistakes can be useful too as a trigger to improve.
Absolutely.
There's
Absolutely.
a sixth habit that I missed. We had apples, we have emotions, we have treats, we have good enough, and mistakes happen. But there's one that I missed.
Choose better. Choose better.
Aha.
Yeah. So this is I think in the list is technically habit 2. And this sort of follows along with some of the later habits of recognizing that small improvements compound. And so this kind of came out of my American heritage, where you go and get a meal and they're like, for 3 cents we can give you fries and a soda with that, and you're like, oh, well, that's a pretty good deal, I'm gonna get that. And then they're like, for another 3 cents we can make that 6 liters of soda, and you're like, oh, that's a really good deal, I guess I definitely need that. But the idea of choosing better is that every time you make a slightly better decision, it compounds and it makes it easier to make those decisions and adds up to more benefit to you later. So instead of upsizing the drink, if you're actually thirsty, just have the small one. Like if you want a little Coca-Cola, great. Have a small one. Hit those taste buds, enjoy that fizz, and then drink water if you're thirsty to fill up.
Yes.
But every time you choose a little better, you make, you've got 2 options here. You got the Mars bar, the apple. Every time that you do choose better, you are making that an easier and more normal decision, and you're compounding your benefits over time.
Beautiful. I would love to change gear a little bit, because we talked about having kids earlier, and it's a real passion of mine too. I've kids from 1 to 11. So all the way, we homeschool. They're mostly at home unless they have extracurricular activities. Yeah, it's good fun. It's a lot of work too. Cool. So we don't have a social life as such because the kids are just too young, and not always reasonable, as you know. But when it comes to things like making good choices for them, one thing that gets me every time when I see it is, every now and then they get toasties. We're really low on carbs in the household, but one thing that they get is a toasty, and the edges are cut off. And I recently just had it because I grew up, with parents that were after war, sort of, there wasn't much. So, you don't waste food. And in particular, not if it's just a little, oh, this doesn't taste quite as good as the rest of the bread or something like that. So it was just like, you're not cutting this off anymore. You will eat this. And I think it speaks to the point that you make in your TED Talk as well, where it's like, you're the leader, you're the adult, you tell them, because you can't really rely on their choices necessarily, especially if the choices include something like chips and sweets and, or sweet granola with Kellogg's, whatever have you. I would love to talk about this because to me, it's a challenge, because you love your child or your children and you really want to look after them at the same time. And it's challenging at times, I found.
Yeah, it is. And it's funny. We had this conversation with my older boy last night at dinner, because he wanted to have, he went to a birthday party on the weekend, and they get a little party bag, and he has like some little chocolate Easter eggs in there. He was like, oh, can I have one of those after dinner? And I was like, well, did you eat all your dinner? He's like, no. I'm like, well, no, you can't. Yeah. But you can have these fresh figs that I brought home, which he was totally happy with. But he's like, well, why? Yeah. Why not? Why can't I have that? It's like, listen, it's our job to make sure that you are as healthy as possible, and we have to set limits on these things. And also just eat these figs and be quiet. And he was totally fine with that at that point, after he actually tried the figs, because they're like super ripe. He's like, oh my God, these are amazing. But, it's just this thing of saying like, I love you, but you kind of have to do what I say sometimes, because I've been alive a little bit longer, and it's literally my prime directive to make sure that you turn out healthy and capable in life. And that means making sure that you don't eat too much junk, but you still get to enjoy some things when it makes sense. And that if you're going to have a treat, you have to earn it. That means you have to eat your dinner, which he likes anyway. But, sometimes he just doesn't want to. He's not actually that hungry. And it's like, well, that's the trade-off. If you maybe don't want to eat all this dry chicken breast and plain rice that we're feeding you, then, you don't get chocolate.
Yeah, fair enough. I think
I'm just kidding about the dry chicken breast and rice. There was chicken and rice last night, but it wasn't dry.
Right. I found, and it's something that sometimes triggers me, that there's this perception, and I believe it's not a particularly great perception, that children are intuitively really good with their choices anyway, and therefore, they don't need as much leadership. And in this day and age, it seems to be really a theme for many. I live in the Byron Shire, where I would say it's very liberal, a little bit experimental as well at times. And the conversations go sometimes like, oh, the child, let's say a 4 or 3-year-old constantly wants to use a different name for themselves. We're considering actually changing the name because they like it so much better. And I get it. There might be a place where this is real, but there's also like, let them have that conversation when they still want to be like that when they're an adult, or whatever have you. But, be really careful not to take everything as gospel that your child says, because it comes from a less sophisticated point of view, and it's not necessarily
because they're
driven
children.
just by the spirit.
They don't have any life experience. They can barely put together formal ideas. They do everything based on emotion, and their brains aren't developed. It's the same reason I'm not letting my 4-year-old get a tattoo on his face. It's like he can enjoy and experiment and pretend to be whoever he wants to be, and like he's trying to figure everything out. And you're going to be doing that until you're like 25. But you're right. Like at a certain point, you're the leader, you're the boss, and your job is to make sure they're well set up for life. And part of that is letting them experiment and enjoy things and try things that you might not like. But if it's not detrimental, but Jesus, man, changing your kid's name every time that they want to be called something different, that's a hassle.
Sorry, but yes,
isn't helping anyone.
In that play, they do that all the time, of course, and but that's one thing. Right. But no, I definitely have heard these conversations. They were quite real, and I think that leads to something that has a lot to do with adult state as well, which is say like, kids are a lot, it's so difficult, to cater to them, and it's really hard. And I don't discredit that there are difficult kids, different situations, like families break, and therefore this is even more complex to keep it all together. Like there are all sorts of reasons, of course, but I also do believe that there is a lot of choices that the leader has to make that easier. And I'm really passionate about it, not from the point of view as like I nailed this, because I wouldn't say I nailed this, but having 5 children, there's certainly a different volume, and therefore you really want to be quite clear with your boundaries. And I'm passionate about it because I've seen this working so well. Because if you just say like, the food conversation is not a conversation we can have every single time of like, what should you eat? Or a similar thing is like, all right, here's your wardrobe, just wear anything. That works with some kids. Some kids are like, I know what I want. But there's also like, I don't really, maybe this or that. The trick is like, give them 2 choices if you want to give them a choice, or give them no choices, right? And I'm sure you have some commentary on that, because to me, it's like, man, if people just be a bit more relaxed about how much freedom and what's the word, sovereignty the child can have at that state, it would make their life better, which means they're better parents because they go to bed in time and all the rest of it.
I mean, because it like you said, there's differences in individual kids and family dynamics and all that. A big thing that we do is give the 2 choices. You can either put your pajamas on now, or you can brush your teeth. At dinner, like, see, they love to have a choice, but if you it's like a Chinese food menu. You go there and there's 37,000 different options on the menu, and all of them are just different combinations of meat, sauce, and veg. It's so hard to choose. But if you say, go to a fancy restaurant and they're like, would you like the meat or the fish? And you go, oh, that's easy. I'll choose the one I want. And you do the same. You give them a choice so they can learn some autonomy. They also learn what are the things that need to be done. And when it comes to meals, we've kind of always had this thing where it's like, this is what's on the menu tonight. If there's something else that you would like, or you would like to have this week, you can let us know, and we'll try to make that at some point. This is what we're having tonight, just so so you're not surprised. And if there's something else that you want within like our safe food groups, meaning like if you're not gonna like this meal, so like, I like to make kangaroo mince nachos. I make a mean nachos. Kangaroo mince is delicious. And so I'll make that, but the kids don't really like it. Well, the baby does. My older boy doesn't really, because he doesn't like melted cheese. It's like, that's fine. we're used to this. We know that. We're making it for us. What would you like to have instead? Would you rather have some yogurt and fruit, or would you rather have some fried egg? He's like, oh, I'd rather have this or that, so it's there's an option there, but we need to know in advance, and he can help make it, and they're perfectly healthy options, and that's fine. But if you're not going to eat something and you're not going to eat enough of it, you're not going to get your little Easter egg from your birthday treats tonight. So that's just the way it is. And so he's got some choices and he's got some boundaries. I do think that every parent should probably read Lord of the Flies if they want to try and let their kids rule the roost. Have you read Lord of the Flies?
I have not. I was just thinking.
By William Golding?
Make a note. No.
Yeah, it's a real classic book. You read it in school, but I've read it a few times since because it's awesome. It's basically about like there's this group of children who get stranded on an island, and they have to work out their own systems of living and providing, and they're all like 10 to 12 years old or something. And it gets messy. But anyway, it's kind of a not necessarily 100% true to life, but it's one of those things is like these things do and can happen. You ever see kids like go around and squash bugs just for fun? Like maybe we shouldn't let them just make all the rules. But having those options and having those safe options for food and things that they're going to like. So if you don't want to try it, and we always say you have to try it. You don't have to like it, but you have to try it if it's new. And sometimes it ends up being great. And sometimes like, oh, this is awful. It's like, okay, well, what is it? Yogurt or eggs? And we do eggs because I have a bunch of chickens, which is also where the crusts go when we make sandwiches. They go to the chickens. So we're not too worried about that because they just get turned back into eggs.
Very good. Really random questions. A question. Are there snakes in Tasmania? Because we used to have chickens until the snakes came with the chickens. Is that something that you have problems with down there?
Yeah, we do. We back onto the bush, but we're sort of peri-urban. Like I haven't seen any snakes out there. We get a lot of blue tongues, but we do have tiger snakes, white-lipped snakes, and copperheads. But I haven't seen any in the area, and there's enough like wildlife and kookaburras and ravens, and our rooster would probably have a go at one of them. So haven't had any issues.
Very good. Glad to hear. I'm thinking, man, I would go to how there's a puppy school to train your puppy, and that's not disrespectful towards kids, but I would love to go for myself to training that I actually understand the psychology of children. I've been talking about this for a while to people. It's like, what are the books to read? What are the books to read to at least understand of what you're really dealing with? Because otherwise you just go, I don't know. I think you impose a reality on the children that and the way that you parent that is not really, it's not really clever. And since we have lost quite a bit of the link to previous generations and their experience, it's really hard to actually know what's right and wrong anyway. Well, if there is a right and wrong, but what works and what doesn't.
And that's a really important thing. Like I have an unfair advantage. My wife is a primary school teacher and has worked in early childhood education forever before we had kids.
Perfect.
But then there's also like, it does definitely help. But like you said too, there's the parents that are out there saying, "Oh, just let your kids do whatever they want because they're beautiful angels and they can never make a mistake." Those are also the ones writing a lot of the books these days. Whereas I come from like a behavior change mindset. Like I help adults change their lives all the time, and that psychology around how we make changes and how boundaries are beneficial to us and how little small things that involve some level of choice is the same for humans of all ages. It's just a little bit harder to sort of contextualize it for small kids and small brains. And so, sometimes I'm a little bit more authoritarian in that it's like, no, this is the way it has to be. And every time that we let them not do this, it leads to them understanding that they can continue to do that. So I'm a little bit firmer with boundaries, whereas my wife is a little bit more, I guess on the more emotional side about it, looking at, but how are they feeling? It's like, sometimes it doesn't matter if they feel bad. Sometimes it's about the outcome. Sometimes it's a matter of them understanding there are certain boundaries they cannot cross, even if it makes them not feel great in the moment.
Yep.
But it creates a good balance having both sides of that.
Yeah. And you know what? Even though this is not about food, but when I look at your list there's something in there. Mistakes happens, sometimes good is enough. And, a treat is a treat, talking about your...
It's all behavior change.
Yeah. Wonderful. That's so clever. Before I ask you the question that we ask every guest on the podcast, I just wanted to check in with you on eat like an adult. Would you say like an adult is described through these habits, or do you have a couple more comments that you want to make on that? Because I think that's a really powerful term or headline, and I was just wondering whether you have anything else you wanted to throw in there.
Yeah, so the habits are steps you can take to make eating like an adult happen. So they aren't like the defining feature. The defining feature is, understanding that if you want to create a certain future, you have to make decisions that lead to that. If your decisions are not leading to where you want to be, you're not doing it right. And, I say eat like an adult because kids do things impulsively. They act emotionally, even to their own detriment. But the difference should be for an adult is if you want to be somewhere, you take the steps to make it happen. If you want to go on a big vacation or a cruise or, even fly to the moon, you need to start taking steps to make that happen. You need to start looking at the logistics and how to save and how to make that happen. Because we have to think about the future. And so if we want to see ourselves at 60, 70 years old being fit, capable, strong, mentally active, able to go out and still conquer mountains, you have to take those steps today. You can't just feed your emotions. You can't just treat yourself all the time. You can't keep choosing worse options. You can't use your mistakes as an excuse to make the rest of your life hard. Like those are habits that help you get there. But ultimately, eating like an adult is understanding that the decisions you make today will create the future that you do live.
If you put it in perspective of having a good framework and coach to get there versus not, how much easier is it?
Oh my God, man. Well, think about it this way. How many people do you know in their 40s and 50s who are not living the life they want?
Well said.
Almost all of them.
Yeah.
How many of those have a coach? Almost none of them.
Yeah. You know what? This is something really significant, not only for health and what we're talking about. I addressed our team last night. We have an all team meeting once a quarter. Everyone in different parts of the world calls in and we talk about things. And I've been saying that, our company has been around for over a decade and there's a reason for it. And we showed our org chart, which is the people that are internal. And then we said, and there are so many people externally that look at our company from different points of view. There's a board of directors, there's an external board, there are different coaches for different parts, there's finance, there's strategy, there's so on. And I always take for granted that you have to have that in the business sense. Like I call that almost an insurance. This is not like a nice to have. It's like if you really want to play this game, like play it well and have the right coach for the right thing. If you think about a sports team, same thing, right? You have some for mental, I'm sure, for physical, tactics, and so on. And yet, when it comes to our personal life, I guess it sounds almost, and there's a financial side of things, but it doesn't have to be. You can have an accountability partner or a friend who can also teach you. But if you do have the coin, engaging with a person like yourself really stack the odds way in your favor compared to, while you're leading a busy life, trying to figure it out and then actually implementing it as well. Hey,
absolutely.
Thanks for that. Look, I would love to. What's it?
I was just saying it's a game changer. Like it just completely makes things different when you have that structure.
Yeah. Actually, I just got an old mentor of mine re-engaged with her for me and my wife, and there's nothing wrong in our relationship, but we said, look, let's start early to actually make sure that nothing goes wrong, and that she detects things that we might not know about, because the odds in terms of statistics are really against us when it comes to stay together forever. We want to do that, and we're pretty sure we have put a lot of good things in place. And having quite a few kids also helps that, I believe, at least. But the statistics don't show that that's necessarily a given. And so just said, well, how about we put some focus and some support in place when we don't need it, so that when we need it, it's all there. I want to finish off with four questions that we asked every guest, and the first one is, what's the best advice you've ever received? By the way, I'm thankful for your mom that she put you on that path of what you're doing. Like, I'm blown away how parents can have such a positive effect, and you're now a force of change. So I'm thanks to your mom.
Yes, no, we still argue about nutrition pretty regularly, but yeah, she started me on this path. Advice. This is something I was thinking about. I was like, I can't remember any specific verbal advice, but my first MMA coach, he taught me how to toughen up. Like, I was a scrawny computer nerd when I started doing MMA, and my original coach was like the guy who kind of showed me how to be more resilient. And, whether that was around learning how to breathe and brace properly, like we'd walk around in the gym between rounds or training, whatever, and he would randomly just punch me in the guts and knock the air out of me. And I very quickly learned how to breathe and brace properly, like training with all these bigger people, being this real small guy, like actually having these adult male influences on like how to be tougher, how to train hard, how to actually focus on like lifting weights and eating. Like, I didn't take all that advice when I was 17, but it's their lessons that stuck with me for the last 18 years. And I'm still in touch with my old coach, even though I'm a whole world away.
It's a transferable advice, I reckon, for many situations.
Yeah. Non-verbal advice, but yeah, definitely took it on board.
Second, if you could have coffee, green juice, whatever you like, with anyone, dead or alive, who would it be?
I mean, honestly, I haven't seen a few of my friends that live over in the US and Canada for a very long time. So I'd like to catch up with them and have coffee. But if we're talking about famous people, I had to think about this, and I'm like, it's not a lot of famous people or formerly famous people that I'd be super interested in like having coffee with. That'd be really neat. But Teddy Roosevelt is one character in history. So former US president, one of the more interesting characters, like did judo and wrestling before it was a thing, like in the 1800s, boxed until he detached his retina and needed to stop doing that because he was becoming president of the United States. Former basically cowboy, very well read, very intelligent, very tough guy, great mustache, literally gave a speech as a president and got shot in the chest and finished his speech. Like absolute like legend, who did so many cool things and had so many like great life experiences, coming from being like a sickly, unwell child to being this like bull of a man who went out and conquered the world. Just an interesting character. I would love to sit down and have a cup of coffee and maybe a spar with him.
Awesome. I just made a note because that biography, I love biographies, and I've read quite a few about the US presidents or founding fathers and that. We're
very interesting people.
Pump that up. Very cool.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. What book has been the most impact or had the most impact on you?
Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings, man. I've read that so many times, done the audiobooks, the movies, gone back and read the books a number of times in my life. I read it at a period of my life when I was in like middle school. And it's the series, it's the books that really instilled in me like a sense of adventure and a like understanding of heroism and, the sacrifice needed for the greater good. And like all these primal, like archetypal, masculine experiences of like just getting out there and doing what needs to be done because it needs to be done. But also this idea of like these journeys and adventure. And like, that's kind of what started me out into the world, leaving my hometown and like just getting a backpack and leaving and walking to wherever I could get to. It all sort of started with the Lord of the Rings.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. I remember reading, in particular, the Silmarillion, which was quite different to, an adventure.
That's a hard one to read.
Backstory. Pardon?
Yeah. It's a hard one to read.
Yes, yeah. Quite theoretical. It works for me, and I've gone back, and actually, it's my go. Like when I fly, I normally don't watch new movies. Hey, like it's Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit,
Yes.
or Harry Potter. That's probably it.
Yeah?
I just
Okay.
cycled through them. Yeah. The extended versions, they're great, and there's always something in it. Yeah, I'm more that type of person. I stick to what I enjoy.
Nice.
Yeah. And how do you start your day? What's your normal routine if there is one?
Well, my 1.5-year-old usually stands up in his cot and starts yelling at me. And then I bring him into bed. And like, he's not like mad yelling. He sits there and he goes, hi, dada, ma. And so I pull him into bed, and then he starts slapping us in the face and body slamming us, and then yelling that he wants a banana. And one of us then gets up. The other hopefully gets another 30 or 45 minutes of sleep. So if you get up, it's quickly make a cup of coffee, feed the toddler. Then he usually does his morning dump. And so you clean him up, and then he's running around in circles until everybody else wakes up. That is how I start my mornings.
So no meditation, ice baths, and journaling for you.
Not right now.
Yeah, fair enough. Awesome. It was a real pleasure and privilege talking to you. There was a lot in it for me personally as well, and I'm sure for the audience as well. If people want to reach out to you, work with you, learn more about you, I mentioned before, there's the website, Strong for Life, all one word, .online. And I can see you have some resources there, recipes and insights. But how else can people connect with you?
Yeah, the website has all the free resources: beginner gym guide, eat like an adult guide, TEDx talk, workouts, that kind of thing. But otherwise, social media, I'm most active on Instagram, Coach Josh Wood. If you're a professional, you can connect on LinkedIn, Coach Josh Wood. That's probably the easiest. So if you want to chat or have any questions, just hit me up on socials at Coach Josh Wood on basically every platform, or shoot me an email. Always happy to chat with people and answer questions.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Josh. Really appreciate it. All the best for your future. I hope we stay in touch. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
I hope today's conversation inspired you. If you found value in it, please share this episode with someone who could benefit from its insights. Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to follow us to stay in the loop and have the best life ever.